In the olden days of D&D, puzzles were a big part of dungeon design and dungeon crawling. You know, whether it was the sensibilities of Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson's, the creators of D&D, or just the ethos of the time in terms of gaming, everybody expected there to be all sorts of puzzles, diabolical traps and mind teasers and everything in dungeons that the players had to solve. But this went away as the game sort of got modernized, more sophisticated, sensibilities changed. A lot of players and GMs kind of scoff at puzzles. They see them as, contrived. They slow down gameplay. They slow down role-playing. But today I'm going to show you how you can incorporate puzzles into your dungeons, into your play, in a way that's naturalistic, doesn't slow down the play, and best of all, creates a lot of fun for your players in your homebrewed campaign. Hello again, I'm KR King, and this is my YouTube channel dedicated to homebrewing a D&D campaign. When it comes to D&D as a player, what I like to do is explore a world, fight monsters, find treasure, magic, go up in levels, and figure out what are the secrets of this world I'm in. What I don't necessarily like is some elaborate grid puzzle that I need a PhD to solve, and I might get killed if I fail. So as a GM, I'm always careful when I'm designing any kind of puzzles for my players, but I do use them, partly because they're such a part of the lore of D&D that I want to honor as the greatest game ever, but also I think that puzzles can make sense in a naturalistic way if you think about some of the parameters, why people might create them and what it is they're trying to do with them. So the parameters I always think about when I'm creating puzzles, whether it's a single puzzle or a whole series of them, is why was this puzzle created? What purpose does it serve? Next, what is the background? Who was the person or group that created it, the time period, the sort of function that this place served? This background is really important. Then the mechanisms of the puzzle, whether mechanical, magical, what the operation, what the players have to interact with in order to solve the puzzle. Then what are the penalties of failure? And these should be scaled in terms of what the puzzle is served to protect. So I want to establish that the penalties for the players if they experiment with the puzzle. Can the party just walk away from the puzzle? If they decide we're not interested in this, are there other areas they can go within this dungeon or this keep or whatever? Do they have to just leave and leave it forever? Are they trapped there? Is it something they have to get through in order for some mission to be accomplished? So whether or not they can walk away is important. And then most importantly, what are the clues that I'm going to give the players? You need to give them all the clues to solve the puzzle and some clues about, the background and the purpose of the puzzle. So why does someone build a puzzle in a dungeon? Almost always it is used to restrict access to an area, whether that's a doorway into some room or series of room, a series of puzzles that restrict access to areas, or to restrict people from leaving, puzzles in a prison dungeon. But it's almost always used to protect something. The person who has the key to the puzzle, the solution, they can go in and out of this area. Those that don't have the solution to the puzzle are barred from entry, or they may suffer some penalty for messing with it and not knowing the key to the puzzle. So in other words, a puzzle is really just an elaborate lock. So typically, whatever is being protected by this elaborate lock should be valuable. The complexity and penalties for that puzzle should scale to whatever it is being protected or prevented from leaving. So that comes to the background of the dungeon. Now, the classic sort of puzzle palace, as we used to say, was created by some powerful figure, let's say a great wizard, who wanted to protect his treasure and arcane secrets, and so he left behind a whole series of elaborate puzzles and traps and whatever, so that anyone who wanted to steal them would pay a heavy price. And the players would know about this, there'd be legends, they'd hear about it, and they'd make the decision, hey, we're at some level, let's go after the wizard's treasure. The prison dungeon, as I mentioned, depending on what prisoners are being held, or if the players are being placed there, this might be some figure that likes to torment people. He puts them in an elaborate dungeon and watches them try to escape, watches them try to figure out these puzzles. So if you have a background like a temple in which the temple members or leaders are trying to restrict access to certain areas, the complexity of the puzzles may be quite simple. It might just be a signet ring that you wear that you place over. It might be some word that you give. Now, as you go farther into the temple, the puzzles or the commands or whatever might get more complicated. You have a temple, and the 4 main leaders of the temple have this room that they all want to visit at the same time. The only way to enter it is all 4 must go in at the same time. Then you can have a situation where you have 4 keys to each leader of the temple. They all have to be placed into the lock and turned at the same time. This way, 1 or 2 members can't sneak in and do things. They're all there together. There's a reason for this, and the solution is, it's fairly simple. The players have to go through, if it's an abandoned temple, if this was, 1,000 years ago that this occurred, they have to go around, they have to kill monsters, and they have to find the various keys, place them in, and then turn them. So the background can also determine the sort of puzzles that are used, the sort of locks that are built to protect their secrets, and the answers to them. So what are the mechanisms of the puzzle? Are they purely mechanical, magical, some combination therein? If so, can they be disabled or dispelled instead of solved? It's very important because your players may try that angle. They may be powerful enough if it's a low-level puzzle, low-level mechanical device, they can figure out how to disarm it, or just dispel the magic that contains it. Is it a puzzle where you have to arrange things in a room, where you have to press on, stone tablets or runes in the wall? Do you have to verbalize something? Do you have to read something off, say some phrase? Now, whatever the mechanisms are that you choose for your puzzle, make sure the players have a good idea of what they're supposed to do. If it involves giving them clues before they go into the dungeon or stuff that's around once they go inside, that's great. But the players should have an idea of how these mechanisms work, and they should have an idea based on the background and what's there of the penalties. They don't need to know them specifically, but they need to know an idea of just how deadly this is going to be. As I go farther and farther in, is it going to get more and more deadly? Can the party walk away? This is also critical. Because if you teleport a group into a dungeon and the only way they can escape is to make their way through elaborate puzzles that have super deadly penalties for failure, you're going to have pissed off players. They're going to say, what is this, right? I didn't ask for this. Why are you sending me here? So in those kind of situations, you should be careful how difficult the puzzles are and the penalties for them. So for example, if they have to go to the Temple of Evil to rescue someone, or they have to go into some place to get some piece of information that's crucial to the storyline of your world, and then you set up super elaborate puzzles with very deadly traps and penalties and whatnot. Again, it's a little, they can't really walk away from this, right? It destroys the flow of the game. It makes the storyline, because we had to walk away from this. And then there's going to be results from this, from their failure to do this. So you want to make sure that when you force them into something, it's not their choice. They can't just walk away, that you scale the complexity, you scale the penalties to be appropriate for what you're asking them to do. And by the way, if they want to go into the Mad Wizard's, Puzzle Palace, super deadly dungeon, you can allow them to get to a certain point and go, oh, this is too deadly, and walk back out. Maybe they want to do research. Maybe they want to get higher level. You don't necessarily have to say, hey, once you go in there, you're trapped. A giant stone slab comes down. Now you've got to go all the way to the bottom. That can also be irritating as a player because the game kind of comes to a halt until they get their way through that. If there is a threshold where if they're going to go past this, you're in it now, let them know. Let the players be aware. Let them make that decision on their own as a group. Now, as I said, the penalties. The players should have an idea of what the penalties are for failure. So if they just walk into a dungeon and there's a puzzle at the first room, and they press some runes or whatever, and a disintegrate ray hits one of the players, they're going to be pissed. They're going to be like, what is this? What kind of deadly? This is the first room of the dungeon, right? You need to give them some warning. You need to give them an idea of how deadly this is going to be. So if you put 2 stone golems on either side of a doorway, and then you have an inscription over that says, say the magic word to pass, the players have an idea, okay, if I approach this or try to open the door, I'm probably going to get attacked by these 2 stone golems. And they have an idea of the danger here. Sure enough, they do that, the golems attack. Maybe if they leave the room or even just get 10 feet away, the golems stop, go back to their position. Okay, now I have an idea here. I can think about this, do some research. And again, they're going to know the deadliness of the Mad Wizard's Puzzle Palace, secret crypts, because they've heard stories about it. But some random dungeon, you need to give them clues. And again, the stone golem, the guardian figures, obviously there's all sorts of guardian constructs. It's very obvious what's going on there. And then you need to give them clues as to how to either get around them, defeat them, or dispel some. The other thing about penalties is if you have things like teleporting the players to another area or, out somewhere else in the material plane or another plane, that's a severe penalty. That's going to alter the course of the entire campaign. So you really want to be careful with those kind of things. Even things like shifting walls, or they get teleported to a lower level in this dungeon, that can really take some sessions to find their way out if they can't just teleport themselves somewhere. It's a penalty that alters the flow of the campaign. They've got missions and they've got objectives. They go into this place and you make it so that suddenly they have to fight their way from 10 levels down. They may get irritated by that. The clues are the final component of thinking about puzzles, and in a lot of ways, it's the most important. You must give the players all the clues that are necessary to solve the puzzle. Very important. When you have a brain teaser, if you're looking the books, these, they give you all the different things. There's nothing, oh, well, if I'd known that, I would have known this, right? They all has to be there. It may take them a while to get all these clues. They don't have them right away. They may have to go to this place and go to that place, but they should have all the clues necessary. A classic example is the doorway with the stone golems, let's say, that I mentioned. Over the wall says, who smote Badark the Terrible? I don't know. Who's Badark the Terrible and who killed him? So they go around the dungeon and they see a tapestry on the wall of a fighter killing a dragon, right? And it says Talon the Great. And you think, I'll bet you that's Bardock the Terrible. So Talon the Great. I don't know for certain, right? So you go back and you answer Talon the Great, and the door opens, they go through, or something bad happens. Actually, he was our opponent of our group. Now that would be a little unfair, unless there were clues that said, Talon the Great, maybe that's Talon the Terrible in a way to this group or something more. The clues should be fairly obvious, but they have to go and find them. They have to do, kill some monsters, do some research, whatever that is, so that there's a little bit of work involved, but it doesn't take a PhD to figure out who smote this terrible monster. Here's a guy killing a dragon. That might be him. And the other element is, if you have a piece of the puzzle that you must solve in order to continue to move forward, and the players just don't get it, you may have to supply them with another clue, a clue you didn't think about. And this can be an inspiration roll or skill check or however you want to do it, but you have to be prepared for that because they may not be able to figure it out. The clue you're giving them, it just wasn't a good enough clue. It's not coming to them. Everything is stopped. They're stuck. So you want to give them all the clues, but you also want to recognize that all the clues you have may not be quite enough. You don't want the game to stop in its tracks. You want to keep moving. So you just got to be prepared for additional clues. So there you have it. Puzzles that are naturalistic, that have a reason to be there, and the complexity and penalties are scaled according to the purpose of the puzzle, what it was there to restrict access to, and a little bit of history in terms of the people that built this, why they did this, their philosophy behind this. The players learned something. And if it's been abandoned for a long time, they get the satisfaction that they were the ones that solved the puzzle and got the treasure, right? And this is very satisfying. This is very fun. This is kind of the epic stuff that we enjoy with D&D. So I would love to hear in some comments puzzles that you've made or puzzles that you've run in that you really liked, some of your puzzle stories, maybe some bad ones, maybe some good ones, because I like to learn from these too, because I still think, yes, the heyday of the great puzzles are probably over, but they still have a purpose in D&D. So please subscribe, please leave those comments. In the meantime, keep playing D&D and tell somebody else about it.